This is chapter 50, entitled Jubilees and Jubilation, the African American Spiritual Tradition. So there's a lot of words already there that need to be clarified. Lots of times we use words and we think we know what they mean, but if somebody asked you, what does it mean? We'd say, I don't know, I use it like this, but I don't know what it really means. So first of all, what is a jubilee? Well, it's in the Roman Catholic Church. Jubilees began to be celebrated formally in the 1300s and are particularly years of forgiveness of sins and reconciliation. They're celebrated every 25 years. The most recent year of Jubilee was 2000, so then to 2025, more than you wanted to know. But also royal jubilees celebrate significant periods in monarchs' reigns and the national life, and each one is named after the period of time which has passed. The silver jubilee marks 25 years, ruby 40, golden 50, diamond 60, platinum is 70. And a jubilee is the celebration of the anniversary of a special event, or it's the anniversary itself, which basically means it's a birthday party. And then the Jewish use the word as a jubilee too. It's in the Bible, in the Jewish Bible, I guess. But anyway, so that's like 3 or 4 different definitions of jubilee, but it's a celebration of an event, particularly. So here it tells us that the key points for this chapter: in the early 1800s, Americans of all backgrounds came together in camp meetings to sing songs of worship. Okay, camp meetings. Wait a minute, what's this? Camp meeting, a type of outdoor revival meeting that was held on the American frontier during the 19th century by various Protestant denominations. Camp meetings filled an ecclesiastical and spiritual need in the unchurched settlements as the population moved west in the United States. 1800s. So remember, anyway. So they moved west and it was the Wild West and there was no religion, and we can't have that. So religion came to make sure we had religion. Definition of a camp meeting: a musical gathering where hymns, spirituals, and folk songs were sung, popular in the 19th century America. This is from page 299 in our textbook. I think we need to know about more about why there are camp meetings, right? So we talk about the Second Great Awakening, and America was founded by religious zealots in New England, right? The Puritans. They came here to practice religious freedom, quote unquote. And so the Great Awakening was a religious revival that impacted the English colonies in America during the 1730s and 1740s, before the American Revolution. The movement came at a time when the idea of secular rationalism was being emphasized. Oh my gosh, secular rationalism. And passion for religion had grown stale. So we got to do something about that, apparently. Christian leaders often traveled from town to town preaching about the gospel, emphasizing salvation from sins and promoting enthusiasm for Christianity. And, you know, religion always does involve money. And so when people are traveling around, how do they do this? Well, they make money, and that's what keeps them going. And who gives them money? Believers. And who are the believers? I don't know who they are, but there's plenty of them. So from this Great Awakening, there was a renewed dedication towards religion. It's abandoned this idea about rational secularism. What the heck? Many historians believe the Great Awakening had a lasting impact on various Christian denominations and American culture at large. And then there was the Second Great Awakening, which came to an end sometime in the 1740s. In the 1790s, after the American Revolution, another religious revival, which became known as the Second Great Awakening, began in New England. And this, that England, New England, and the Church of England was a breakaway from the Catholic Church. And so this movement is typically regarded as less emotionally charged than the First Great Awakening. It led to the founding of several colleges, seminaries, and mission societies. A Third Great Awakening was said to span from the late 1850s to the early 20th century. Some scholars, however, disagree that this movement was ever a significant event. So we'll forget about the Third Great Awakening. The definition of spiritual, right? There are a number of different definitions of spiritual because it has to do with spirits, but in this case we're talking about American spirituals. Definition: folklore, devotional genre of the United States, sung by African Americans and whites, page 299. And remember, when you have a textbook, the authors always have a bias, and whether they deny it or not, they can't help it because they're humans, and humans have a bias. So sometimes it's good to question where the author is coming from and what their motivation is to promote an idea or not. For instance, here, sung by Americans, African Americans, and whites. Well, I'm not sure. Anyway, what are spirituals? Before the abolition of legalized slavery in 1865 by the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln, a particular style of American folk song rose in prominence among enslaved African peoples living in the American South. So it doesn't say so in the book, but here they're telling us that this is a result of slavery, or the life that the slaves were put in. And remember, slaves were abducted from Africa, and they didn't even speak the same language and have the same culture necessarily. So they were thrown together, and they had, they tried to survive, and they did. Among enslaved African Americans in the South, the song form spiritual came to be known as spirituals, also known historically as Negro spirituals. What are spirituals? Spirituals are religious American folk songs created by and strongly associated with the African American community, and are a sound combination of traditional Christian hymns and African musical traditions. The spirituals definition encompasses the history and cultural implications of this song, as well as alluding to its religious context. Spirituals are an excellent example of folk music because of its creation by a community over a long period of time, and its historical context is paramount to understanding and appreciating the form. So this is a African American music, one of many African American musics that started in America, and Africans were a main contributor, if not the originator. And so it brings a question. This chapter I have included is in the secular choral music. And this choral music, so is it secular or is it sacred? Well, it's not part of a religious ceremony, and it's not always sacred. So I have it in this unit on secular choral music. It'll talk here about a ring shout. So what is a ring shout? The religious dance of the African American slaves performed with hand clapping and a shuffle step to spirituals. Now that's from our textbook. Let's go back to this part here. Right, so in their own meetings, we talked about these camp meetings, Black slaves and freedmen developed a semi-improvised tradition of sacred songs known as spirituals. Well, I don't know that it came from these camp meetings because, first of all, slaves weren't free to have camp meetings until after 1865. Although in New Orleans, there is a park that's called Congo Square, and it's there today. And the slave owners, prior to the Civil War, allowed their slaves to meet at Congo Square on Sundays, and they had like a festival, a get together with music and their own cultural um, aspects that they could share and enjoy, and they were free on at this park on Sundays. So did that happen in other places? I have not heard of that. So spirituals such as Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, perhaps you've heard that, and we're going to listen to a performance of that, were popularized by choral groups from African American colleges, and it's really one college, in the late 1800s, and were arranged as art songs in the early 1900s. They have served as the basis for other elaborations ever since. Remember, an art song is a song that's composed, and you know the composer, and it's for a performance in a concert type situation. That's what an art song is. Where were we? All right. Spirituals and the Jubilee tradition. Now we're going to bring this together. Talk about the Second Great Awakening. We already know what that is. And at these camp meetings, and which lasted for days or weeks, African Americans, European Americans gathered, but I don't think they gathered together. Hymns of praise to popular or folk tunes. And again, with the ring shout, this is African American. This is not a European event. So the spiritual tradition, camp meetings of slaves. Again, when did these people have these camp meetings? Certainly not when they were slaves, unless they were just on their plantation permitted to get together. And probably, whether they're permitted or not, they would do things in private or in secret to some extent. And each master, a slave owner, uh, perhaps would manage things in his own particular way. And where a slave could be punished at the owner's will, uh, the owner was not interested in being nasty or to the slaves, other than for his benefit. In other words, you own slaves to make money and get rich, which is pretty sad, but that's the truth. All right, here are some pictures of some camp meetings. This says circa 1830, and I don't see any blacks here, but somebody playing a trumpet over here. Obviously, they're overnighters, and somebody is declamatory. Another one, similar type picture. So this must be the way it was done. The tents and people gathered in front of a speaker trying to inspire them, and I'm sure that there was a hat that passed sooner or later. Another one here, a little different type of setting, but obviously they're prepared for a lot of people. What is this? Oh, so we have African Americans, but it looks like a different type of setting. Same idea, out in the woods, some tents. And here are some African Americans, most likely slaves, in a closed, in a indoors, right? Indoors. Interesting to see. So it must have been a second floor ladder here. And people who are overtaken by the speaker's words. A little side note here, right? In the 1890s, 1880s, Antonin Dvorak is a very famous and popular composer from Czechoslovakia. It's not Czechoslovakia, from Republic of Czech, I would think. And he came to America and worked like as a conductor for the New York Philharmonic, and spent time in Minnesota, and studied or paid attention to American music. And he wrote a famous symphony about American music, and he included African American spirituals in this piece of music. And Anton Dvorak really believed that American music was the spirituals, and he thought this was truly an American original type of music. And he was right. And he told America was trying to find their way as far as art music. And he said, this is your music, whether you like it or not. Pay attention to this, and it's real valuable. And so he worked with this man here, who arranged some of these, but not until 1910s was this published. So the spiritual started in 1830s, who knows when, right before the Civil War. And this work by this man is not until the 20th century, where he arranged spirituals and made it even more of an art song. The Harlem Renaissance is really a 20th century phenomenon, and we'll talk about that in a later chapter. Harlem is, of course, a section of New York, but early in the 20th century, and perhaps before that, it was mainly populated by African Americans. And the Harlem Renaissance meaning rebirth, they took it upon themselves to promote what culture that they had, and art culture as well, with sculpture, painting, whatever, at writing, and they promoted and said, look, world, we are not just former slaves. We are artists, we are creative people, and we are making a valid contribution. Pay attention and recognize our efforts. And it did have an impact on the way African American culture was being assimilated into the rest of the American culture. This song, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," is an example of a spiritual, which we're going to listen to. And I think it's, let me skip to this slide here, because after the Civil War, a number of universities were started by white people to and for African American slaves. So they were freed, and they gave them an opportunity to get a higher education in a university. Fisk University from Nashville, Tennessee, was one of the first. And see my slide here about they opened in 1866, right? Even the Emancipation Proclamation was only 1865, and shortly after the university opened, the Fisk Singers from the university started in 1867, and by 1871 they had developed into a program which was largely spirituals, and the university was really desperate for money, so the singers went on tour, and they raised over $20,000 and saved the university from bankruptcy, which was a lot of money. And apparently, over like the next 10 years, they raised $150,000 or so. So it was a mutual benefit. So this is what the original Fisk singers. And so one of the songs that they sang was "Sweet Low Sweet Chariot." And so there was a lot of conflict that happened because of this. And they were so successful that other groups started singing, calling themselves Fisk singers, and they said, no, you can't do that. And so they would say, okay, we're the almost Fisk singers, or we're the neighbors of the Fisk singers. And so there was a problem with controlling the tours that were taking place, and there was more than one group taking place claiming that they were the Fisk singers, and they went to Australia and Europe and were very successful wherever they went, even though there was still a lot of racism towards the efforts that they made, and people were just went as a curiosity to see how could this be that these African Americans could produce such wonderful and original music. But they did. So one of the original singers, his son, like 20 years later, started another Fisk singers associated with the university. And we're going to actually hear music performed by this second group. And they even had some singers from the first group. So it's not something that was just a afterthought. It was largely the same repertoire that they used in the 1866, 1871, and then in like 1900, because we're going to hear an original recording. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, the words. And it's one of those things where there's a double meaning here, right? In the spiritual, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot is interpreted by folk artist Margaret Ramsey. And you're working out on the field and as a slave, and you're singing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" is like "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, pick me up and get me out of here." That's what they're really hoping for. So the Fisk arrangement here is strophic, right? First stanza and then a refrain. And we're not going to pay attention to the Burleigh arrangement. Recomposition, right? He takes it and changes it. It's like, is that right that he had an attitude to do that? Anyway, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. It tops here. It says gapped, pentatonic, limited range, paired open and closed phrases. Okay, here, a pentatonic scale. We talked about this before, but it is 5 notes, right? And used in some African, Far Eastern, Native American music. Can also be found in Western music as an example of exoticism. A gapped scale, a scale that lacks some pitches of the 7-note diatonic scale. For example, a 5-note pentatonic scale has gaps. And here they're telling us, right? This is a gap pentatonic scale. Da 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 dee da da. Mostly diatonic, homophonic with clear lead singer. So it's written for tenor, tenor, bass, bass, male quartet. And here is a poster. Right? Originally organized in 1871, it says. All right, let's listen to the piece of music.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for the academy home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for the academy home. I'm sometimes up and I'm sometimes down. what did I see? Coming for the Academy home. And the angels are coming after me. Coming for the Academy home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for the Academy home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for the Academy home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for the Academy home. Swing low, sweet chariot.
Incidentally, this second group, which recorded, it started in the 1890s, but they recorded in the 1900s, and we're going to listen to a recording made then. And for your information, this is the technology that was used, and there were a number of systems developed to record music, and Thomas Edison was really not the first one to do this, or successfully record music or record sound. And this is how it was done. And this cylinder was able to take an impression. So this, it doesn't show, but this was the horn, and this, it would funnel the sound down to a needle, which would make a mark in this impressionable surface, and then you could play it back. This is what it looks like. One of the earliest recording technologies was the wax cylinder, pioneered by Thomas Edison. This is a cylinder on which our recordings of the Fisk Jubilee Quartet is stored. And you can see right at the top, it says Sweet Chariot Fisk Quartet. Amazing thing here is every one of these cylinders had to be made one at a time. They did not have a way to mass produce them. So a group that was making a recording would show up at the recording studio and record the same song all day long. And I don't know how many they could record in one day, but that's what they did. And so each one of these is an original performance. And even though it's the same people doing it again, it's an original performance. All right, here's another song by the Fisk Jubilee Quartet, which existed in 1909 to 1916. And just to give you an example, there's a lot of contrast in their music. And I have 2 CDs, a collection of this original music by the Fisk Jubilee Quartet. Let's listen to this. I couldn't hear nobody pray.
Oh, I couldn't hear nobody pray. I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh, way down yonder by myself, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh,
this idea and genre of black singers, male singers, carries through the whole 20th century up into the Temptations, and I don't know if there are any groups like this now, but it was. Here's an example from 1954, rhythm and blues of a group of singers, four, and this is the same category as madrigal. As the way I look at it, you have madrigals and then you have spirituals, and if you put your mind, you think about it, it's like, oh, I get it. There is an activity which is the same.
Life could be a dream. Life could be a dream. Do 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 shaboom. Life could be a dream. If I could take you up in paradise up above. If you would tell me I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and open we'll meet again. Boom, ding dong, ding dong, a lang, a lang, a lang. Oh, 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 bip, a bip, a dip. Oh, life could be a dream. If only all my precious plans would come true. If you would let me spend my whole life loving you. Life could be a dream, sweetheart. Every time I look at you, something is on my mind. If you do what I want you to, baby, we'd be so fine. Oh, life could be a dream. Shaboom, if I could take you up in paradise up above. Shaboom, and tell me, darling, I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and hope we meet again. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, life could be a dream. Life could be a dream, sweetheart. Shaboom, if I could take you up in paradise up above. Shaboom, and tell me, darling, I'm the only one that you love. Life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and hope we meet again. Boom, boom, boom. Ding dong, ding dong, a lang a lang a lang a lang a oh, bip, a bip, a dip. Oh, life could be a dream. Life could be a dream. Do 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 shaboom.
That will end our chapter 50